Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's Cybersecurity Insider Program webinar. We're very happy to welcome our representative from the FDA, Jessica Wilkerson, here with us today to talk about medical device cybersecurity. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica to do an introduction and to get us started.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Like Laura said, I'm Jessica Wilkerson. I'm a Senior Cyber Policy Advisor and the Medical Device Cybersecurity Team Lead within the Division of Medical Device Cybersecurity within OST. We are the government, so we must have several layers to our titles and our offices. Apologies for a little bit of the late start. Very topically, we had some technical challenges in terms of me not being able to install whatever programs I like on my computer, and that's creating some challenges. But Laura and I have gotten creative, so we are going to make this work. So I was invited to come talk to you all today about a couple of different things. One, there's been quite a few changes and updates to the actual authorities and guidance that FDA uses when speaking to medical device cybersecurity. So we want to go over that and give you all sort of the latest and greatest of what FDA is up to, our authorities, our guidance, where we're headed, all of that. We also, in talking with John and preparing for the meeting today, thinking about what would be most useful, decided one of the things that will be particularly useful is talking about real world experiences. And what we mean is things that myself as an FDA staffer and the medical device cybersecurity team lead have actually responded to in terms of actual medical device cybersecurity incidents. So we'll talk about a few of those. And then finally, one thing that we have been trying to do a little bit more lately is talk about actually what our team can do for all of you. As folks out there in the sector who are dealing with medical devices that have cybersecurity concerns or characteristics or whatever it is, we are here to help you. We have things that we can do if you're having some kind of issue, and we want to make sure that you are aware of what those things are. So we'll switch to the next slide. What we have started doing in our presentations when we talk to various different groups is we want to start with the why. Why did FDA get granted and ask for explicit cybersecurity regulatory authorities? Why did FDA release a guidance, finalized guidance in 2023 that was 57 pages when the guidance that had previously been finalized was 9 pages? Why did FDA create a Division of Medical Device Cybersecurity, which is a relatively new thing? So in terms of the why, Laura, if you will do me a favor and just sort of click through until I tell you to stop. These are essentially the reasons, right? These are real world issues that we have seen, that we have either directly dealt with or have occurred within the healthcare sector. And these are headlines. These are things that you would see that the public has seen in terms of medical device and healthcare cybersecurity issues. The last of which being the Change Healthcare cyber attack, which, as we know, has been hugely disruptive, and the disruptions aren't even over. So one more in terms of the slide. The bottom line of why are we doing all of this? Why the authorities? Why the guidance? Why the Division of Medical Device Cybersecurity? It's because cyber threats can have and do very much pose patient safety risks to the healthcare sector. And FDA, as part of its mandate to provide for the reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness in medical devices, believes and understands and is therefore acting on the reality that that means that medical devices need to be cyber secure, and we have a role as much as anybody else in making sure that they are. So next slide. So where we will start is on the actual new authorities that we received. So the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, that's what that FD&C Act is, now has something called Section 524B, which is literally ensuring cybersecurity of medical devices. So that is a named section now within the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act with explicit cybersecurity regulatory authorities. So let's go over what those actually are. So where these came from, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023 was signed into law on December 29th of 2022, and it included several things related to FDA, not just the things related to cybersecurity. So those things were all packaged in something called the Food and Drug Omnibus Reform Act, or FDORA. And within FDORA was this Section 3305, ensuring cybersecurity of medical devices. It gets very complicated translating legislation into actual statute or into the actual code of regulations in the U.S. code. So when Section 30305 was put into the U.S. code, it became Section 524B. So the bottom line is you can really ignore everything that I just said. It's just fun history. What matters is Section 524B of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act refers to the cybersecurity section of the Act. One thing that we have noticed is creating a little bit of misunderstanding and confusion. The new section, Section 524B, actually applies to several types of prospective submissions, not just 510Ks. So for those who are coming in to FDA for medical device submissions after March 29th of 2023, which is when the Act entered into force, anyone submitting a 510K, a de novo, NHE, a PDP, or a PMA submission to FDA for what qualifies as a cyber device, we will go over that in just a second, must meet the requirements of Section 524B. So as you can see, the Act has been in effect for just a little bit over a year now, and we've been seeing some interesting lessons learned, which I will also touch on. So next slide. So to start with the definition of a cyber device. So Section 524B is part of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that specifically talks to medical devices. So first, for Section 524B to apply, you must be a medical device. The thing that you are talking about must be a medical device. And then further, it becomes another step. If your medical device meets these following requirements, then your medical device is by law, not by FDA regulation, by law, a cyber device. So a cyber device is something that includes software validated, installed, or authorized by the sponsor as a device or in a device, has the ability to connect to the internet, and contains any such technological characteristics validated, installed, or authorized by the sponsor that could be vulnerable to cybersecurity threats. And this is an and. So medical devices that meet all three of these criteria are considered cyber devices. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later when we talk about something that FDA just recently published on this and other things related to the law. But it is important to be aware, and I think actually I'm speaking mostly to a hospital audience, not a medical device manufacturer audience. So I'm actually would be willing to wager that some of you have already heard this from some of your vendors, essentially saying, oh, our medical device is not meant to be connected to the internet, is not intended or designed to be connected to the internet. It's not a cyber device. It does not have to meet the new requirements of 524B. That may or may not be true, but let me tell you the definition of cyber device as FDA interprets it. FDA does not interpret the has the ability to connect to the internet as is intended or is designed to connect to the internet. FDA interprets has the ability to connect to the internet as an inherent characteristic of the device design. So if the device has a USB port, if it has Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, if it connects to a cloud, if it has some kind of software update capability, which it probably does, because that is now another aspect of the law, the chances are that medical device can transitively connect to the internet. So it has that indirect, if not direct, connection to the internet, and would, under FDA interpretation, still qualify as a cyber device. So for us, that definition is very broad. So I would encourage all of you, if you are hearing from various medical device manufacturers that their devices are not cyber devices for whatever reason, there are some resources available that you might want to look at in terms of just double checking and in that interpretation. But we'll keep moving on. So let's talk about the requirements. This is going to be a very busy slide, so I'm just going to verbally summarize what is here. So if you have a medical device, and that medical device meets the definition of a cyber device, then these are the things that that cyber device must do, have, whatever the provision applies to. So the first one is that medical device manufacturers of cyber devices for cyber device submissions must submit a plan to FDA to monitor, identify, and address in a reasonable time post-market cybersecurity vulnerabilities and exploits. And this one we do like to highlight. Cyber device manufacturers must have coordinated vulnerability disclosure programs. In the past, FDA has considered coordinated disclosure programs incredibly important and has highlighted them, has recommended them. Having coordinated vulnerability disclosure programs for manufacturers of cyber devices is now a statutory requirement. It is now in law. So that's one big one. The second one, and this is a very deceptively short provision that is very deceptively broad, because this is the design requirements. This 524B(b)(2) is essentially what says you must design a cyber secure medical device. So what the provision specifically says is manufacturers of cyber devices for cyber devices must design, develop, and maintain processes and procedures to provide a reasonable assurance that the device and related systems are cyber secure, and they must make available post-market updates and patches. So a couple things here, right? Like that's deceptively got a lot in it. One, you have to design a cyber secure medical device. But two, not only do you have to design a cyber secure medical device, you must make sure that the related systems are cyber secure. So it's in the law that the related systems must also be cyber secure. So what's a related system? Well, does the device depend on a peripheral, like a phone or a tablet? Does a clinician use some kind of peripheral to program the device? Does it use the cloud? Is it have some kind of software update infrastructure that it relies on in order to maintain updates? Those things all may be related systems. And if they are related systems, they must also be cyber secure and be shown to provide that reasonable assurance of cybersecurity in the submission to FDA. And if they're not, FDA can actually deny the submission, find it not substantially equivalent or not approvable on the fact that the related system was not cyber secure. So this is very powerful. It's very broad. We think also it's very appropriate given what we've seen. But then there's also this patching element, which sometimes people don't seem to, they seem to focus on the first part of the definition or the first part of the provision and not as much on the second. But the second part of the provision says medical devices that are cyber devices must be patchable. So it's no longer, that, and it never necessarily was, but now it's really not optional that devices be patchable. By law, they have to be. They have to be patchable in two ways. They have to be able to be patched on a regular cycle, and they have to be able to be patched out of band for critical vulnerabilities. So both of those things are very important. We've seen that happen. Not only do you have to keep up with the routine updates to keep devices cyber secure, but as soon as something happens, there may be cases where you need to go directly to some kind of out-of-band fix, and that is now accounted for in the law. The last specific provision relates to software bill of materials. So medical device manufacturers of cyber devices must now provide to FDA software bill of materials related to their devices. And those software bill of materials must, by law, include commercial, open source, and off-the-shelf software components. So the manufacturer, for their own internally developed software, they have to tell us, they have to include those in the SBOM, they have to include their licensed and commercial software, and they also have to include their open source software usage. So we think that this is very important. We've been banging the SBOM drum for many years now, and we did finally get this in law, so we're very happy about that. And then the last one, which is really of more interest to the FDA, but could in theory become interest to everyone, we have the ability to promulgate additional regulations to provide that reasonable assurance of cybersecurity if we think it necessary. So there's actually a specific provision in the law that allows us to add additional requirements through the regulatory process if we see the need. So next slide. So the statute is one thing, right? Like now there is explicit statutory requirements for many, many years now, and this is not just related to cybersecurity, this is across the board. FDA publishes guidances that essentially have more detailed recommendations on how FDA recommends manufacturers comply with statutory requirements. So one thing about guidance, you all may or may not know this, I know that this becomes a topic of some interest. Guidance is non-binding. I will say that. Guidance is non-binding, but it does not mean that the topic that the guidance is covering is optional. Even without the statutory requirements, which now exist and are related to this, manufacturers have to meet the requirements and the regulations. They have to meet the requirements in the statute. They can choose to do the things that we recommend in the guidance, and I will be honest, that is probably their most simple and straightforward path to a decision that they like, to an approval. because this is how FDA has said we think this is the right way to go about this. If they want to do something different, they can, but they have to explain why what they're doing is as good as what we recommended. It's not that they can do nothing. They have to do something. It can be the thing that we recommended, or it can be something else if they can explain why the something else is as good as what we recommended. So I just like to highlight that because we run into an issue sometimes where people try to stress the fact that guidance is non-binding as this argument that somehow cybersecurity or whatever, FDA is not actually enforcing cybersecurity when that's not the case. So in any case, the guidance was finalized on September 27th. I know what it says on the screen, but it was technically September 27th of 2023. So it's been finalized for a good couple months now. The recommendations in the guidance are intended to help manufacturers comply with the requirements under Section 524B, but it is not limited to Section 524B. So this is another important distinction we found, that people think, people have somewhat misinterpreted the law to think that if they can get out of being a cyber device, then they don't have to worry about cybersecurity in an FDA submission, that it's somehow not part of what FDA is going to look at. That is not true. If you end up not being a cyber device, but you still fall into the guidance scope, which is broader, then you still have to show the things that are in the guidance, either exactly as they're recommended in the guidance or through those other mechanisms that we were talking about. So there's just one fun thing to keep in mind as you're talking to your manufacturers or running into this yourself. Statutory scope is smaller than the guidance scope and is entirely contained within the guidance scope. So chances are if you have some kind of medical device that has some kind of software component, it's going to be in the guidance if it's not actually considered a cyber device. Further, the guidance covers things like how cybersecurity fits into the quality system requirements and pre-market submission documentation requirements. Potentially not as much of an interest to the hospital audience, but does give FDA a lot of tools in its tool belt in terms of how to make sure that cybersecurity is being appropriately addressed, including things like inspections. So sometimes FDA shows up at a manufacturer and actually inspects them, as it implies, and they can look for the cybersecurity elements as part of those inspections. That's where those quality system requirements tie in, because the inspections look to see whether or not manufacturers are complying with the quality system requirements. There was a public webinar on November 2nd of 2023 that is available online. It included a very detailed Q&A, so if you're curious about the guidance and how it applies, I would highly recommend going and looking at that recording, which is what that link includes. And then eStar, for those of you who are familiar with eStar, is essentially the submissions platform for certain types of submissions, 4, 5, 10Ks, and it can be used for some of these others. It includes a guided walkthrough of the guidance to support electronic submissions. So it essentially provides a walkthrough of how to submit the cybersecurity documentation required and what that documentation is. So next slide. So the draft pre-market select update, this is a little bit of bureaucratic shenanigans. I don't know that it's going to be of any interest of why FDA had to do a select update, but I think the important thing for this audience to take away is what the select update does is it lays out FDA's interpretation of Section 524B. So it tells the public how FDA is interpreting the various terms, the various requirements under Section 524B. So this is of pretty good interest to a lot, certainly within the medical device manufacturing community. So it provides FDA's interpretation of things like cyber device, related system, and so on. It lists out the pre-market submission documentation requirements for each of the 524B requirements. It talks one big one, which I think probably is of interest to a lot of you. This pre-market submission documentation for modifications to existing devices. Many of you probably have legacy devices in your environment that are creating headaches for you. There is a possibility that some of those devices will have to come back to the FDA for reapproval for whatever reason. Just depends on the regulation, the case-by-case facts of the device. But if those devices have to come back to the FDA for resubmission, they get wrapped into 524B. So 5C4B only applies prospectively, so only for submissions that come in after March 29th, 2023. But there are possibilities that devices that were approved before March 29th, 2023 may have to come back. And if they come back, now they get wrapped into the 524B scope. So that actually gives another bite at the cybersecurity apple, so to speak. There's also things in the select update that talk about how 524B essentially fits into FDA's existing regulatory paradigm. When it gets finalized, it's going to be folded into the Premarket Cybersecurity Guidance. So the thing on the previous slide, these two things will essentially become one thing. And for those that are interested in hearing a little bit more about FDA's interpretations of the guidance and so on, and also the questions manufacturers might be asking us about our interpretations, there's going to be a public webinar held on Tuesday that is open to the public to attend. That public webinar will be recorded and posted later if you're not able to watch, but that webinar should also be chock full of very good information. Also, this is open for comment. So if you're looking at this and you're like, I want to go read the FDA's interpretation of cyber device, and then you think that we got it wrong, or you think that we got it right, or whatever the case may be, you can file an official comment as part of the comment process. Next slide. So one thing that we also like to talk about with this is that what we call the pre-market requirements, so the things that manufacturers must do before their devices can be sold in the United States, feeds very much into the things that the manufacturers must do once their devices are being sold in the United States, once they're actually in use in the environment, in the post-market. And the thing we really like to highlight on this slide is that these two things feed each other. So if we're seeing issues in the post-market, which we're going to go over those in the next part of this talk, then we will, in certain cases, update our pre-market review criteria to address for those. And I can give just a really quick example of what I mean. We had a circumstance, I'll give a little bit more detail later, where certain medical devices became unavailable during a cyber incident because the design required them to communicate to a remote cloud in order to be able to calculate dose, how much dose of a given treatment to give a patient. When that cloud connection was interrupted, the devices essentially weren't able to function. So I can tell you that we added questions into the review, essentially saying, do you have a 100% dependency on a remote capability? And if that remote capability goes away, what is your backup plan? Do you have one? And if the answer is, there is no backup plan, there may be a chance that that device is not getting approved with that design. So we do this in a lot of cases. We take things from the post-market, we update our review criteria in the pre-market, and it becomes that, we hope, very virtuous cycle. So next slide. The other thing that we'd like to talk about, and this is something that I think is interesting for folks not in the manufacturing environment, but who use medical devices, who depend on medical devices to be aware of. Cybersecurity is not the only thing that matters, right? Cybersecurity, incredibly important. But when you talk about cybersecurity, what we are really trying to do is make sure that a system that uses advanced digital components and has these kind of capabilities can operate safely, effectively, and securely. And the thing is, sometimes in order to do that, there's other things that have to be considered, such as interoperability. You know, does this device need to interoperate with other equipment within the hospital? The answer is probably yes. So how do you interoperate in a way that ensures device safety, effectiveness, and cybersecurity? There are considerations for things like device software functions. Certain software functions are considered medical devices. Certain software functions are not considered medical devices. So what does that mean? How does that affect their review? How does that affect their operation? So there's a whole constellation of guidance documents that we recommend that people look at when they're trying to ensure that they're preparing for a cybersecurity submission and are able to design, deploy, and maintain cybersecure medical devices. So next slide. So just to give a little bit of insight or background into cybersecurity reviews, just because I think it's helpful even for those who are not directly involved in this process to know how this process works. So these are a couple of just the high-level elements that FDA thinks about and looks at and has designed our policies for cybersecurity reviews around when it comes to these kinds of medical devices. One of the big ones is, and we have this conversation with the medical device manufacturers pretty frequently, because for some it's a little bit of a tough mindset shift about software engineering, which they like doing, they understand, it's sort of their bread and butter, is about ensuring that certain things happen. You want the device to do XYZ because that is how you treat the patient. Cybersecurity is about ensuring that certain things don't happen. But the universe of things that you don't want to happen from a cybersecurity standpoint is probably pretty large, approaching infinite. And so we understand that this is an incredibly difficult concept, but it requires that mindset shift of, success is if my device does XYZ when it is supposed to do XYZ. Cybersecurity is not only does the device do XYZ when it is supposed to do XYZ, but it doesn't do A, B, C, and Z when it's not supposed to, or just at all. So we talk about things like this in threat modeling, and why we pursue cybersecurity risk management the way that we do is essentially comes down to this concept. The big questions for us when we're looking at cybersecurity for devices, when we're trying to see whether or not we think the cybersecurity is adequate, is answering the question of what can the device do or be made to do versus what it was designed to do. So we have some manufacturers who try to argue that, oh, well, my device was never designed to be connected to the internet. My device was never designed to do this. My device was never designed to do that. What we have the conversation with the manufacturers about is it doesn't matter whether or not the device was not designed to do it. It matters whether or not the device can do it. And if the device can do it, the assumption needs to be made that somebody or something will attempt to do it. And if the thing that is the action there, is the thing that we're trying to keep from happening, is bad, then the device needs to be designed against that. So it's this what can the device be made to do question that we are looking to ask and have confidence in, that the things that the device can do are not going to create patient safety risks. We also talk a lot with the manufacturers that past performance does not equal future security. So the fact that they had a cybersecure medical device 10 years ago certainly does not mean that they have a cybersecure medical device today. And in fact, best practices from 10 years ago are certainly not always the best practices for today. So major changes are probably needed. And the other thing that we talk about with them is don't ask the question about, well, who is ever going to do that? Who's going to try to hack my device? Who's going to try to manipulate somebody's therapy? Who's going to try to deny access to medical devices on a large scale? One, I think we've seen in this case that there are people who are interested in doing those kinds of things. If for no other reason than it could make them a lot of money. But the second thing is the question is just irrelevant, right? And this goes back to the idea of like, what can the device be made to do versus what it was designed to do? So it was never designed to have somebody do something nefarious with it. But if it can be made to do it, then that's the problem, not this question of motivation of whoever is going to do that. So FDA works with the manufacturers a lot on trying to move away from this question of motivation. Next slide. So a couple of things that we think about when we do reviews. Cybersecurity applies if the device is or contains software. The cybersecurity documentation is going to be required if the device meets the definition of a cyber device. So this goes back to the fact that the statute made some of these considerations statutory requirements rather than regulatory. The cybersecurity considerations are going to apply regardless of whether the software or the software component was designed by the medical device manufacturer or a third party. So maybe something relevant or important for you all that from the FDA perspective, the medical device manufacturer owns the risk of the device. We do not accept, oh, that component is a third-party one. There's nothing we can do as an answer if the third-party component is creating some kind of risk. We look to the medical device manufacturer to be responsible for addressing that risk. We consider the risks to increase if devices contain one or more of the kinds of interfaces you see here: USB, Ethernet, Wi-Fi, cloud, Bluetooth, etc. And as we talked about before with some of the statutory considerations, the cybersecurity considerations apply for the entire system, not just the end device. So things like the software update infrastructure, the cloud applications, the commercial devices, and so on. And again, under the text of the law, if the devices in question are cyber devices, these related systems might in fact be related systems that also must demonstrate that reasonable assurance of cybersecurity. So next slide. So I'm not going to go into any great depth on this because we're actually about to switch tracks and start talking about some of the example incidents that we've seen. But just as a high level, so that you all know, there are 5 main sections within the guidance. One is security risk management. This is a pretty beefy section. Includes all kinds of things: vulnerability management, security risk management, and so on. The security architecture has 2 main components. The first being literally what are the characteristics of a cybersecure system and how should those appear within a device. Things like authentication, authorization, code integrity, and so on. The second part of security architecture is what we call views. Somewhat tongue-in-cheek, this is essentially the FDA saying, please, please, please draw us a picture. Your systems are probably pretty complicated. They have a lot of moving parts and a lot of moving pieces. It's far easier to look at a picture and understand what the system is doing in the different components than it is to read 10 pages of narrative text. Do you also need to give us the 10 pages of narrative text? Quite possibly, but please also give us the picture. Cybersecurity testing is a big section. This includes things like pen testing, validation testing, and so on for security. Labeling, this is probably pretty relevant to you all. These are the labeling recommendations we have specifically related to cybersecurity. There's 14 different elements we call out, including SBOM. We do recommend that SBOMs be provided to customers as part of the labeling. And then finally, the cybersecurity management plan, which is essentially how the cybersecurity is going to be managed over the total product lifecycle of the device. So now, completely switching gears, we're going to talk about incidents that we've seen. So we're just going to go one by one of some of the incidents. So the first one, if we bump one more, is WannaCry. So I don't think I need to belabor this point too much. I think folks here are likely aware of WannaCry, but for those who may not be as familiar, this was the 2017 global outbreak of a wormable ransomware. It exploited a legacy protocol in Windows and SMBv1, and it was spreading like wildfire across the globe. Very nearly hit the United States, but we got extremely lucky that it was stopped before it actually reached the United States. But the big thing here is that it actually shut down quite a few emergency rooms in the UK. It affected the National Health Service pretty severely. And this was one of the first big global public instances that we had seen where a cybersecurity threat like ransomware was actually affecting the ability to deliver patient care. So this one, I will admit, I did actually get to observe this from a distance. I wasn't with FDA yet. I was actually still with the Energy and Commerce Committee in the United States Congress. But this was a big wake-up call for everybody. This was the first time when we could not explain away or deny the fact that the cyber threat had directly created the impact of patient care. So the next one is an incident where, and I actually had mentioned this previously, there was a medical device manufacturer who had designed their devices to be 100% dependent on a cloud connection back to the manufacturer's corporate network. So you had devices out in the field when the devices need to be able to calculate the dose to be able to give a patient before treatment. They would need to communicate back to the manufacturer's home network, the specific cloud within this corporate environment. And when that manufacturer was affected by ransomware and they pulled all of their corporate network offline in order to remediate, it meant that those devices, which were at several, a couple dozen different hospitals spread throughout the country, could no longer get information on how much dose they were supposed to be able to give a patient. So as you can imagine, this created some pretty serious consequences for the patients who relied on those medical devices to be able to get treatment. And this did, in certain cases, last for a couple of days to a couple of weeks. So this was another pretty big wake-up call for us. We had been sort of holding our breath, waiting for a cybersecurity incident that actually directly infected the medical device itself. So actually got onto the device or manipulated the device or whatever the case may be. This one very starkly reminded us that availability of medical devices can be just as impactful, if not more, as direct infection or direct manipulation of devices. So this was one that really highlighted that availability aspect. Next one. This was an issue. Luckily, it managed to be pretty self-contained. but it is a confirmed incident that I've actually was involved in responding to, where we had a medical device manufacturer. They experienced a ransomware incident. And what we ended up discovering in talking with that medical device manufacturer is that, again, because IT best practice is pull the network down. If there is some kind of issue, pull the network down so that you can remediate, so that you can prevent spread and so on. And so they did that. And what it meant is that they actually had to shut down one of their manufacturing facilities for 4 days. So this wasn't an impact where that the medical devices were directly infected or so on, but there was potentially a supply chain issue, a shortages issue of these devices not actually getting manufactured and not actually being able to get out to customers. So we've now actually seen an issue where manufacturing has been shut down in the medical device sector because of a cyber incident. So next slide. This one was a fun one, mostly because this was an accident. We experienced a cyber incident with several medical devices where somebody just forgot to update a piece of software. And unfortunately, that piece of software was critical for authentication of users of that devices. So when that software essentially expired, the medical devices were bricked. They could not be used because you could not log into that device anymore. And it required a significant amount of effort and a visit by a field service engineer to actually fix the device. So this one was extremely disruptive. It lasted quite a bit of time, depending on location, depending on how long it took for the field service engineer to actually get out to the location and fix whatever the device may be. And it was global. I can tell you that it was global. This happened simultaneously for all of the relevant devices in several different countries. So this was a pretty big one. And again, this one was an accident. This one had no cyber threat actor. There was no ransomware. There was no cyber threat. It just is, they didn't update a piece of software, and we ended up where we did. So next one. And this is actually the last one that we'll go over. So this one was interesting again. This goes to that element of related systems. So we saw a ransomware incident at a hospital. So this wasn't actually at the medical device manufacturer. It was a hospital who experienced a ransomware incident. And the cyber threat was actually able to get from the hospital network to a server that was relied upon by a specific device, because the server was where the treatment plans were held. So the device was fine. The cyber threat did not actually make it onto the device, but because the server containing the treatment plans had been locked up, they were still not able to use the device because they didn't have any of the history and they didn't have any of the treatment plan information on what they were actually supposed to be doing with any given patient. So this was another pretty problematic issue. I will also highlight this was an interesting issue showing that there may be some important elements of making sure to mark which servers in your environment are actually associated with medical devices that are not just a normal server servicing just the network part of the overall network infrastructure, because the server was actually temporarily removed from the hospital for forensics purposes, because it was not, I don't think, fully understood that by removing that server for forensics purposes, they'd actually removed the ability to, one, for the device to run, but also for the device to be remediated. So, we were sort of joking in the aftermath that somebody needs to go around with a label maker essentially marking like this server is part of medical device, do not remove, but may not be a joke. So just, something fun to consider. So those are the incidents that we've seen, just some kind of the examples. It's not even a full list, but wanted to give you an overview. So the last part that I wanted to go over, and I do want to leave time for questions, is how FDA can help. And so I will apologize in advance, Laura. These involve a lot of clicking, but I have faith in us. So to flip to the first part of this, and then second, when we talk about cyber incidents, what cyber incidents can do sometimes is they start out in the overall hospital network, but there's a possibility that they're actually going to be able to directly infect medical devices, making them unavailable or unsafe to use. We just talked about some of the incidents where FDA has directly seen this and been part of the response. So there's going to be some graphics that are going to pop up. We can just sort of roll all the way until the text shows on the other part of the screen. But again, the cyber threat can start in the network, transit through the network, such as Wi-Fi or a wired connection, and actually reach a device. And then if it reaches the device, now there's questions about, can the device not be used? And even if the device can be used, is it safe? So DMDC, I realized that I did the faux pas of using the acronym without having previously defined it, but DMDC stands for Division of Medical Device Cybersecurity, so it's the division that I sit in. So if these kinds of things happen at a hospital or one of your organizations, there's a couple things that we can do, what DMC can do. We can assist affected entities with engaging the device's manufacturer to get timely assistance in remediating the issue. So said a little bit more in lay terms, if you call me and you say, hey, we had some kind of cyber incident, this medical device is acting funky, we're having trouble getting a hold of the medical device manufacturer to get help in fixing it, I can call the medical device manufacturer. And medical device manufacturers famously pretty responsive to the FDA. So you can essentially call us in as backup if you need help getting in touch with the manufacturer to make sure that issues are actually getting addressed. The other thing that we can do is we can coordinate conversations between you all as the entity who may be affected, the manufacturer, and the FDA to quickly address things like revalidation. So sometimes even once the device is fixed, it's been re-imaged, everybody's confident from a cybersecurity standpoint that the cyber threat is gone. There are actually regulatory requirements in place that essentially says you can't use that on a patient until it's been validated that the re-imaging and all of that has not done something to the device that would make it safe. That can be a pretty lengthy process, just depending on the exact circumstances. But what we can do is if you call us up and say, hey, we're having this issue, we need to get this thing back into service because we need to use it to treat patients, we can essentially coordinate the FDA staff who have to check off on things like revalidation, the manufacturer, and you all to just get that done as quickly as possible. The last thing that we can do, and there's other things that we can do, but these are the three things I want to highlight. We can answer questions related to device cybersecurity, regulations, or other related issues. So medical device cybersecurity is extremely complicated. It's usually somewhat difficult to really nail down who's in charge of what. Is it the manufacturer who's supposed to be doing something? Is it the HDO? Is there a reason that FDA has to be involved? Sometimes it's just helpful to call the FDA directly and ask us. So please know that you absolutely can call me, you can call FDA, and you can ask us questions on medical device cybersecurity. We would much prefer to field those questions and get you the answers that you need rather than have you guessing and potentially complicate things. So we've got one more of these slides that we'll just sort of run through the graphic and then go straight into the what we can do. So the other one that we've seen happen with cyber incidents is it can actually continue to create medical device challenges even after the incident is over. So the cyber incident happens, right? The ransomware infection occurs. The ransomware infection is remediated. What we have seen is that sometimes the remediation or the cyber threat does something, right? I think the best example that I can think of is that there was a circumstance where the ransomware essentially corrupted a server and that server could not be rebuilt. And that server was necessary for the medical device to be able to function. And so, there was a circumstance where the hospital essentially went back to the medical device manufacturer and said, like, hey, we need your help. We need this fixed. We need the server rebuilt. And sometimes the manufacturer might say, well, that's going to take some time. We'll get around to it when we're able to get around to it, but they don't have the same sense of urgency. I wasn't going to put it on the slide, but the other thing that we've run into is that the medical device manufacturer says, great, we will absolutely help you out with that. That will be an absurd amount of money. If you pay us an absurd amount of money, we will absolutely help you out with that. So what we can do, what DMC, the Division of Medical Device Cybersecurity, can do in circumstances like that, one, we can help you all understand the regulatory requirements for the manufacturer. Like, what are the manufacturer's responsibilities under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in circumstances like this? The other thing that we can do is we can, no worries, Laura and I are doing some live jazz here. We can essentially talk to the manufacturer and essentially go to the manufacturer and say, manufacturer, like, what's going on? what are you doing here? What have you said that you're going to be options that you're going to be offering to the affected entity in order to help address this issue? So we can have the conversation directly with the medical device manufacturer on whatever the issue may be. And then finally, again, that third one is that we can help you engage the device manufacturer if there's, again, some kind of issue where they're not being responsive. So just to summarize, because I got a little confused, I think. The first one, we can help you understand what the regulatory requirements are from the manufacturing side. We can work directly with the manufacturer to understand what's going on and why they're saying something is or isn't going to work a certain way. And then we can assist you with getting in touch with the manufacturer to make sure that there's actually a timely remediation. And so I think if we just pop to the next slide, one thing that we have like to point out when we talk about all of this, you don't have to wait for a cyber incident. These kinds of issues of we're having some kind of cybersecurity challenge with a medical device, the manufacturer isn't being responsive, the manufacturer is whatever. You don't need to wait until you've actually been hit by a cyber incident to contact the Division of Medical Device Cybersecurity to actually ask for help. If you are struggling to handle a device cybersecurity issue and you could use assistance in understanding and addressing it, you can just call us. That's what we're here for. We like to make sure that people know that they don't actually have to wait until there's been some kind of incident. So I think that might actually be the end of my presentation. So apologies again for the technical challenges up top. I will fully own those, but if there are questions, I am happy to take them.
Thank you, Jessica. If anyone does have any questions, you can put those in the questions pane, and we'll be happy to read those aloud. This is a great opportunity to ask Jessica any other questions that you have around the slides or anything that you've been wondering about medical device cybersecurity. And we'll just give a moment to do that. I will send out a follow-up email to everyone, and I will include those links that you shared to the recorded webinar and the upcoming webinar on April 30th. So everyone has that. One question came in. Could you go back to the slide defining what constitutes a cyber device? Okay, let's try.
Yeah, so that was pretty early.
I don't know. Let's see.
Okay, it'll be one more.
One more back?
Oh, no, I lied. One more towards the front. There you go.
Is this the one?
That's the cyber device definition. If there's a specific question.
Let's see. Don't know if there's a specific question. If someone has a question on that, if you want to enter it again. We did have another question come in. Is all of this intended to only influence new devices applying for approval, or are there provisions for older devices and devices that manufacturers have deemed end of life?
Yes, so the statute applies to devices that have come into the agency and continue to come into the agency after March 29th, 2023. However, FDA cybersecurity program and cybersecurity reviews did not start on March 29th, 2023. We've been doing this for well over a decade. And so the previous guidance, our previous expectations, FDA has considered that cybersecurity is part of safety and effectiveness for a very long time. So FDA has been reviewing for safety and effectiveness, including cybersecurity for again, well over a decade. So no, yes, the statute only applies to things that have come in after March 29th, 2023, but no, that doesn't mean that things that were approved beforehand get a free pass. There are still post-market responsibilities that the manufacturers have to meet, which includes things like making sure that devices remain cyber secure, things like making sure that devices are patched, providing supports to customers and things like that. Is it a little bit more challenging sometimes actually getting answers and getting fixes for things, I will say yes, absolutely. But this is where talking to my team, talking to the Division of Medical Device Cybersecurity can really, really help, because we can help understand, based on when the device was approved and so on, like what exactly the requirements are. We can have those conversations directly with medical device manufacturers and make sure that things are actually getting addressed.
Okay, thank you. Well, I don't see any other questions right now. So Jessica, I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your insight and ways that hospitals can reach out and get help with medical device cybersecurity. And like I mentioned, we will be sending out some of these resources and this recording as well. And if anyone does have any questions, please do reach out and we'll get those answered for you. So thank you, Jessica, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and thank you for controlling the slides.
No problem. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.